Ooh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this and talk at the same time. Eyeliner. My hair is wild today. Sorry, I'm like going for lion. Queen of the jungle. Lions don't live in the jungle. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day. I know. And I put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. Today's story was recommended by a very sweet viewer named Tanya Smith. Hello, Tanya! This is the story of Butch Bowyer. On February 17th, 2002, 54-year-old Forrest Fleming Bowyer, who goes by Butch, was at his home in Phoenix City, Alabama with his 12-year-old son, Brett. Phoenix City is right on the border of Georgia near Columbus, right on the Chattahoochee River.
It gets hotter than a hoochie coochie.
Butch was the owner and operator of Southern Auto Sales, which is a buy here, pay here used car business. He was very hardworking and pretty successful. So Butch was raising Brett by himself. You know, he was a single parent and Brett's mom wasn't in the picture at all. Everything he did was for Brett. You know, his life revolved around his son, and he wanted to make sure that Brett had everything he needed to succeed in life, you know, including a great education. He had him set up in the best possible school. He attended the private Christian school Glenwood, where 98% of the students go on to receive college degrees. I put on too much. Brett was a really good student, and he had actually just attended his very first boy-girl dance on Valentine's Day just 3 days before this happened, and he was still very excited about it. Oh my god, I put on way too much. I'm like that girl on TikTok. Oh god.
Honestly, you just have to lather it on and trust the process.
Okay, so February 17th was actually a Sunday, you know, a school night. They had just finished putting Brett's things out for the next day, his clothes and books and all that jazz. He was about to take a shower and go to bed, and Butch was sitting at the dining room table doing some title work for his business when there was a knock at the door. It was pretty late at night to be getting visitors, and they weren't expecting anybody, but still Butch got up and answered the door. It was like 10 o'clock at night, you know, for context. At the door were what appeared to be police officers. They weren't like in uniforms, but one person's shirt said agent on the back and their hats said drug enforcement. The agents told Butch that they were narcotics officers and he was under arrest. He produced a warrant that was signed by a local judge. It was a name that he recognized. A pretty small town, you know. There was obviously like a huge mistake. You know, he didn't do drugs and he certainly didn't have any drugs in his house. The agent said it didn't matter. You know, I have a warrant. You gotta come with me. Butch asked if he could call someone to come stay with his son. The agent refused. You know, he didn't want anyone to be called. So Butch, a law-abiding citizen, you know, allowed the agent to handcuff him and his 12-year-old sixth grader son, Brett, and then went outside with him. So when they got outside, the vehicle that the agents had arrived in was like a white, unmarked Ford Crown Victoria, very common law enforcement vehicle of the day, if you remember. It actually had a bunch of antennas and stuff on the rear trunk area, and inside there was like the security partition, so it seemed legit. Butch and Brett were placed in the back seat of the vehicle, and the two agents got in the front seat and they drove off. The agents had told Butch that they needed to take him down to the sheriff's office. So when they were driving and they passed the sheriff's office, Butch was squinting like, I thought you said I needed to go to the sheriff's office. Well, they told him, simmer down. Okay, we have to go meet with two other agents, so...
Sir, on behalf of Augustus General, I'd like to invite you to simmer down now.
They drove up to Highway 431 and they went to an area where the road was kind of under construction. So they got Butch out of the car and walked him at least 100 yards, maybe even 200 yards away, like in front of the car. Then the men started demanding to know where the safe was at his house. They knew that he had it and he had $100,000 of cash hidden inside. Well, there it is. These are very obviously not cops, not narcotics agents, not any kind of law enforcement. Butch knew he was being robbed. He told them he did not have a safe in his house. He certainly didn't have $100,000 in cash. But he did have a fair amount, because of his business. He told them he had about $40,000. At this point, he's pretty concerned about his safety and, of course, his son's safety. So he's like, if you take me back to the house, I'll give you whatever money you want. I'll even take you to the bank when it opens in the morning. Just don't hurt me or my son, please. Well, the two men finally agreed, and they actually drove back to Butch's house. And Brett waited inside the car. Remember, he's still handcuffed. Did I mention that? They're handcuffed? The men took Butch inside, and he showed them inside his closet a box where he kept, a lot of cash. Well, they kept asking if he had more, where's the safe? Where's the safe? He doesn't have a safe. He keeps money in a box. Well, they took all of the cash that he had, and they also found a handgun and took that with them as well. Then they put Butch back in the car, and they drove back kind of to the same area where they had driven before, out to that construction area on Route 431, Highway 431. So this area, Highway 431 out in Seal, Alabama, was under construction at the time, and really what that means is that it was dark, okay, very dark. There's no lights. It's very remote. It's essentially a dirt road. All right, so once they got back out there, they again removed Butch from the car and walked him away in front. One of the men walked over and cut Butch's neck with a knife, to show him how sharp it was. This was a threat, of course. They were still trying to get Butch to tell him where the rest of his cash was hidden. He insisted he gave them everything, which was true, by the way. Then one of the men pushed Butch down to his hands and knees and cut his neck from ear to ear. He's slumped over and bleeding badly, his throat is cut. Then the man got on Butch's back, and told him to just shut up and be quiet and go to sleep. Then they took Brett out of the car and brought him over to where Butch, his father, was bleeding out on the ground. So these two fake agents interrogated Brett now, this 6th grader. Meanwhile, Brett is pleading for his father's life, and then one of the men said, "You better start worrying about what's going to happen to you and not your daddy." Charming. Well, the second guy then cut Butch's neck again for a 3rd time. Then the two men produced a shovel and some bags from the car. Then they dug a hole a little deeper than a foot, a shallow grave. So the first guy says to the second guy, "I did one, now you do one." So then the second man shot Brett in the head, and then he fell into this shallow grave. Unfortunately, Brett did not die immediately. As he fell into this grave, was making some terrible gurgling sounds, so they shot him 2 more times. After they removed the handcuffs from both Brett and Butch, the two guys grabbed Butch and then tossed him into the grave on top of his son. They decided to not shoot Butch. They'd already fired 3 gunshots. They didn't want to call any more attention, and Butch was definitely bleeding out. So they shoveled the dirt from the grave and the lye from the bags that they had carried out from the car. They sprinkled them over the father and son, collected their shovels and whatever else they had brought out there, and then the 2 criminals got in their car and drove off into the night. But, you guys, hold on to your butts. Butch Bowyer wasn't dead. He waited until he was sure that the 2 fake agent robber murderers were gone, and then he started to dig himself out of the grave. Can you believe it? So it took about 10 minutes, but when he finally was able to get himself and Brett out, he tried to revive Brett, but he was gone. Also, remember, Butch was gravely injured. He was losing a lot of blood. His throat was cut, after all. So, holding his neck with both of his hands, he got himself up and he walked, out to the road to try to find help. He walked about a 1/4 mile before he was able to flag down a car. The motorist that pulled over was in absolute shock to see what he was seeing. He was literally holding his throat closed, together. The person called 911, and luckily there was a sheriff's deputy less than 2 miles away, so he was able to respond very quickly.
Hey, Lon, no bullshit. I got a man, his throat's been cut to hell. He said his son's been shot 3 times, is buried in a grave down here at Uchi, and he wants to go get him. He was buried and dug himself out. This is a bad one.
When the deputy arrived, he immediately was getting information from Butch, and he got an ambulance there very fast. But Butch refused to leave the scene until somebody went to go get Brett. He wouldn't accept any treatment at all until they retrieved his boy, Well, they pretty quickly found Brett and he was transported to the hospital, but he was unfortunately pronounced dead on arrival. Back on the roadside where Butch was rescued, he had been able to describe the vehicle and the two men, one of which he actually knew who it was.
Sir, who did this?
Jim, he thinks,
Jim who?
thinks last name. I think of him in a minute. Jim Brooks.
Brooks?
It's not Jim, it's not his dad, it's his son. He thought I know who he was. Let's see what you got there.
Okay.
The guy's name was Jimmy Lee Brooks Jr. So he recognized him as the son of one of his business associates, Jim Brooks, the guy who worked for him as a repo man.
Lobotomy. Isn't that for loonies?
Not at all. A friend of mine had one.
So remember, Butch had this buy here, pay here business, which means that he financed the cars that he sold. And sometimes if a person defaulted on a loan or was late on payments, the car would need to be repossessed. So Jim Brooks would be the one to go out and get these vehicles, and sometimes his son Jimmy Jr. would work with them to help out. Butch also told the law enforcement officers that the men had taken the keys to his house. Remember, they didn't believe him that he didn't have any more money there, so it's pretty likely that they were going to go to his house to keep looking. Well, with that information, the police went back to Butch's neighborhood to kind of stake out the house, and wouldn't you know it, he was right. Pretty much immediately, a white Crown Victoria was spotted lurking around the neighborhood. So the cops pounced. There was only one person in the car, the driver, Michael Carruth. So Michael Carruth was a local bail bondsman and all-around slimeball. He fancied himself a bit of a hustler. He was into some very creative business enterprises. Basically, he thought he was like the smartest guy in the room. To be fair, he was smart enough to put his house and vehicles and even his business, the Tri-County Bail Bonds, in his wife's name, so there's that. Well, once he was in police custody and being questioned, he flatly denied being involved in anything like this. I mean, whoever did this to Butch and Brett obviously didn't leave any witnesses, right? When that vehicle was searched, they found like a treasure trove of evidence. They found money, handcuffs, shackles, like police-like uniforms, hats that said narcotics officer. Michael Carruth had Butch Boyer's house keys in his pocket, and he had on his shoes and pants blood. Butch Boyer's blood. Say that 3 times fast. Butch Boyer's blood. Butch Boyer's blood. Okay, so as I mentioned, Michael Carruth was a bail bondsman and a creep. So what he would do is sniff out somebody that he could bail out, knowing that they would never be able to pay him back. I'm talking large bails, like $45,000. He would use this to keep these people under his foot. You know what I'm saying? He would get them to do work for him as repayment. And then he would start with the threats. So I needed to understand the difference between bail and bond. And if you don't know, let me explain it real fast. We're learning. So the difference between bail and bond. Bail is cash money that you pay to get released from jail in exchange for the promise that you're going to show up to your court appearances. And then once you do that and it goes all the way through the process, you get that money back. It's usually a large amount. Thousands of dollars. Bond is typically when somebody can't afford to pay bail, and what they do is they work with a third-party person, like a bail bondsman. They offer collateral that's like the value of the bail, and then they pay a non-refundable bond, which is like a percentage of the total bail amount. That's like the finder's fee. So then the bail bondsman posts the whole bail, and then they take the responsibility of the person. So if they don't show up, then they send a bounty hunter out to catch them and send them back to jail.
Showtime!
And then in exchange for finding that person, they get a kickback from the courts. But if it all works out and the person goes to all their court cases and all of that stuff, the bail bondsman gets their money back, like you would have if you just pay your own bail. Does any of that make sense? Okay, so bail versus bond brings us to Jimmy Brooks Jr. So Jimmy Brooks Jr. had been in and out of jail many times in Russell County, Alabama. When Butch ID'd him to the police that night, they knew exactly where to find him, at his fiance's mother's house. When police showed up, he was actually burning the clothes that he had worn that night. When Jimmy was arrested, he immediately confessed. He spilled all the beans. and then some.
Roll that beautiful bean footage.
He fully confessed to shooting Brett Bowyer, and his accomplice, Michael Carruth, was the one who cut Butch Boyer's throat. Jimmy met Carruth when he bailed him out or bonded him out of jail 6 months before this. Jimmy had a pretty long record. He had been stealing cars and shit. Well, his latest arrest had smacked him with like a $35,000 bail, which Michael Carruth paid. So that means that now Jimmy has to come up with $35,000 worth of something of value and probably like a 10% bond, so $3,500. Well, Jimmy didn't have the money for these car stealing escapades, and Carruth bonded him out so that he could take control of him. Essentially, he was sourcing henchmen. Jimmy was trying to come up with enough money to pay the bond.
Right, my sister only paid $200 and my mother-in-law has her house up for it, but shit, it ain't but $20,000 is the value of her house. Okay. Alright, anyways.
Once Jimmy was released, he was trying to be legit. You know, he got a construction job. He was paying Carruth every week. He couldn't keep up. It was just not enough. He said at first it seemed like Carruth was being nice, trying to be helpful, but then he just kept coming around and all he ever talked about was money. Then, of course, he started telling Jimmy, you know, I'm really sorry, but if you don't pay, I'm going to have to revoke the bond and you're going to have to go back to jail. You get it. Well, Jimmy was dumb and desperate, which is exactly where Carruth wanted him to be. So he approached him with an offer to help him out with a job. So Michael Carruth was looking into a new business venture of hydroponic marijuana growing. Well, he needed some capital for this business, some cash, and Carruth asked him, Jimmy, do you know anybody who keeps a lot of cash around? He did. You know, a guy that he worked with had parents that didn't trust banks for whatever, I guess, but they had a lot of money in their house. They were the Ratliff family. So Jimmy and Carruth came up with a plan under Carruth's guidance, you know, to wear masks and gloves and not leave behind DNA, you know, all of these things that they needed to do to not get caught. They also had actually made a list of people that they had planned to rob that they suspected or knew kept cash in their houses. Well, when the day came to go do the Ratliff job, Michael Carruth picked up Jimmy Jr. and another guy named James Gary. James was kind of in the same boat as Jimmy, you know, in and out of trouble, and Carruth had bailed him out, you know, paid his bail, and he was under his thumb, boot, foot, whatever. He owed him, is the point. Carruth dropped off these two dummies. Then they cut the phone line at the Ratliff home and then broke in the back door. The Ratliffs were older, Thurman and Catherine. They were shocked and surprised, but they didn't go quietly. There was a physical struggle with both of them separately. They both ended up dead. And their cash stash to the tune of $30,000 was found by Jimmy and James, and then Carruth later picked them both up. He wasn't with them, by the way. He then disposed of the guns and they split the loot. That was the one and only time that James Gary was part of any job that Jimmy was part of. After the Ratliff murders, which by the way happened about 2 weeks before Butch and Brett, Carruth approached Jimmy with another job, promising that it would be the last. One of the names on their list was a guy that Jimmy's father worked for, Butch Bowyer. We know all this because Jimmy confessed it all to the police. Everything. Police arrested James Gary for his role in the Ratliff murders. He was charged and found guilty and sent to prison for the rest of his life. What about Michael Carruth? He maintained it the entire time that he was totally innocent.
Sure, Jan.
This, like, actual human booger
Boom, 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 boom.
tried to make a deal with the police. He told them some baloney story about driving Jimmy and James to the Ratliff house because they had some kind of business with him, but he didn't know what it was. He also said that he would happily accept a, you know, charge of simple assault in exchange for ratting out a bunch of local drug dealers. This motherfucker, like, really thought he was in some kind of gangster movie.
If we do this and we do the federal thing, I want to die in a very public way. In other words, I want a death certificate with my name on it that says I died over here while I was fishing or I was found in the lake floating, because I'm on the next plane to Tahoe.
He thought he was going to get the police to fake his death publicly and then send him off to the West to, like, witness protection. Okay, Michael. I should do a red lip, huh? Red lip? Red lip today? Yeah. Jimmy Lee Brooks Jr. and Michael David Carruth were charged with capital murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and robbery, and both pled not guilty. With Jimmy Jr.'s confession, evidence that they found in the car and on Carruth from that night, and Butch Boyer's testimony at the trial, it was an open and shut case. On October 9th, 2003, Michael Carruth was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to death. On February 9th, 2004, Jimmy Lee Brooks Jr. was also found guilty on all counts and also sentenced to death. Butch Bowyer actually made a full physical recovery. He was very lucky because no major arteries were severed when his throat was cut that night, so after 2 surgeries, he was back on his feet again. Since Brett's death, Butch Bowyer has donated many contributions to scholarship funds for students to attend Glenwood School, and the Glenwood School planted 12 Bradford pear trees in Brett's honor, 1 for each year of his short life. In 2004, Glenwood School dedicated their gym to Brett Bowyer. And that is the amazing survival story of Butch Bowyer. Thanks again to Tanya Smith for this incredible, terrible recommendation. You guys, for real, you have the best, worst recommendations, and I love hearing from you. So if you have a Crue Trime story that you would like to recommend to me, just check down in the description box. There's a Google Doc for you to leave all of the dirty details. If you want to know what makeup I might have used in today's Luke, then look down in the description box. If it's still available, I will link it for you, and if it's not, I will link something similar. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube most weeks, and you can follow me on all of the other socials, I think. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Butch Bowyer. 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 Bauer. Bowyer. Bauer. Bowyer. Bowyer? Hang on a sec. What the fuck? Bowyer. Bowyer. I was right. Bowyer. What did I say? Bowyer? Bowyer. Bowyer. I'm really messing it up.